On today's show, we'll be joined by weekly co-host Alykhan Bijani to discuss Jabari Smith Jr. and Eric Gordon both out for the second Rockets preseason game against the Toronto Raptors. Jabari Smith Jr. suffering a left ankle sprain in Rockets practice. Just how severe is the injury and how much time might he actually miss? Then we dive into the Rockets' new offensive system for this season, the 4-out, 1-in offense, and what we've been able to learn through one preseason game. We're going to talk about all of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
The Houston Rockets select Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
Every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
You're getting somebody who's going to come in with a chip on their shoulder, somebody who's going to come in and compete from day one.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as Rockets Watch. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. We are free and available on all podcast platforms, including YouTube. Joining us now, as he does each and every week, is, of course, our weekly co-host, Alykhan Bijani, the X's and O's guru himself, who you can follow on Twitter at Rockets_Insider. That is not Brunch Insider on Twitter. It is Rockets_Insider. Alykhan, this is, first off, it's great that we got you here at the tail end of the week because we have a lot to kind of break down about what we've learned about this team through through camp, through practice, clips, discussions about what this team is trying to achieve, and really trying to pick apart some of what we learned from the Rockets preseason opener against the San Antonio Spurs. Now, we do have a bit of unfortunate news to share at the top of the show, and that is that, unfortunately, Jabari Smith Jr. Has a left ankle sprain that he, incurred at the very end of practice Wednesday afternoon. Which is really frustrating because he's not going to be available for the game against the Raptors. I highly doubt he'll be available for the game against the Heat come Monday night. We saw a picture of him circulating on social media. He's in a walking boot, which, again, could just be precautionary, but I don't expect him to be back in time for these next two Rockets games, which is really unfortunate because he was really, really impressive in that preseason opener. It's worth noting that John Lucas, when discussing, talking to us at the Wednesday media availability, post-practice media availability, Mark Berman of Fox Sports basically said, asked him, hey, is everybody else on the roster healthy? Everybody good? And Lucas paused for a second, gave an answer and said, we'll see. And then we were all like, what does that mean? Like, that's super ominous. And so now we fast forward 24 hours later and we find out at the Thursday Rockets practice that it actually meant, it was Jabari Smith Jr. who sustained the injury, and it actually happened on the very final play of practice, believe it or not, which is really disappointing. You could see Lucas was kind of, a little hard on himself about it. Had he maybe called practice, 5-10 minutes sooner, a few plays sooner, whatever, then maybe Jabari doesn't get injured. And so that kind of has me worried about the long-term ramifications of it, how serious it may or may not be. But obviously, we'll keep you guys posted with all the updates, news, whatever we hear and find out about it right here on the show, as well as, I'll share the news on Twitter as soon as I receive anything of note about Jabari's timeline, how he's progressing back. But maybe that's a good place to start, Alykhan, is, maybe just, any takeaways that you had from watching Jabari specifically in the preseason opener about how he impacted the game, either offensively, defensively. What was more impressive to you, his offense or his defense in that game? Wherever you want to, I'll let you steer the bus a little bit.
Yeah, when I think about Jabari Smith and his preseason debut, I was very impressed with him offensively. I know what he can do defensively. I saw that in summer league. We've talked about that for multiple episodes over the course of the summer, how he can essentially change your defense. Take away a whole passing lane for you defensively. Play some good point of attack defense as well. He can go around screens. He can stay under. He can switch. He can do all the different types of coverages that exist. Offensively was where I was impressed. His shot looked faster. His shot looked higher in terms of release point. Everything looked good for me when it comes to Jabari Smith shooting. But most importantly for me, when you're a team that's going to run as much as the Rockets plan to do, he was excellent in transition. And what I mean by that is not that he was running and he was running with the basketball like Christian would, bringing the ball up the floor and creating an offense. Not a slight to Christian, just he wasn't doing that. What he did do, though, was if he didn't get the rebound, Jackson, he ran the rails. And what are the rails? The rails in basketball are the sidelines. So he ran the sidelines. He went to the corner. And some of those shots, if you look at when he got the basketball, even if he didn't attempt it and he made it to pass to somebody else, it was when he was in the corner because he got there in the first 5 seconds of the shot clock. When you're big, your 6'11" big is able to do that and space the floor effectively and run and force the defense to go into scramble mode. Even if you don't make the shot, it just opens you up for so many high percentage opportunities. And so I was very thrilled to see Jabari play so well offensively on that end. And then I think we're going to talk about this over the course of the episode, but the Rockets offense, the way it's looking and how well Jabari played off of Alperen Sengun, man, I think Rockets fans should be excited about what's to come.
Absolutely. No, 110%. That is an area of focus that we're going to kind of dive into a little bit, kind of exploring some of what this 4-out, 1-in offense, has shown us through one game. Again, it's one game. You got to take it with a grain of salt, temper the expectations a little bit. But I will say that
San Antonio Spurs, sorry.
Right. I mean, hey, man, it might be half the NBA tanking for Wemby after seeing those 2 exhibition games and the absolute clinic he put on. But I do want to highlight before we dive, completely into just, the offense, at large, kind of a broad scale picture of what the offense actually looks like, what they're trying to achieve, and our early impressions of it. One other thing I wanted to focus on is in that game, Jalen Green did struggle. Like he struggled, to put the ball in the bucket. But I loved his approach, and it really felt like he was playing aggressively and driving with the intention to seek out contact, to try and get to the rim. And he wasn't like shying away from things. He was aggressive in trying to do what he wanted to do on the floor. Felt very confident in what he was doing. Every time he had the ball, whether he was running pick and roll, whether he was attacking out of isolation, whether he was in transition, it felt like he was confident in everything that he was doing. And his playmaking is what really stood out to me. Is he had a handful of really, really solid reads. As you were talking about Jabari Smith running the rails in transition, Jalen Green hit him for one of those threes in transition where Jabari is just running right alongside, the court side stretch of the court. And Jalen Green brought the ball up, kind of hesied for a second, had his defender frozen, and just whipped the ball off into the corner to Jabari, and Jabari just caught it, elevated, nothing the defense could do about it, even though there was a defender right there checking him in that moment. And I think that really stood out, was just Jalen was making some really high-level reads, and I feel like if he had hit, he went 0-4 from long range. If he had hit 2 of those threes, we're talking about a completely different perception of Jalen Green's game that night, right? We're talking about, man, Jalen looked fantastic and he was facilitating and he hit his shots, but instead he went 0-4 from 3. So we're like, oh, well, he couldn't, hit his shot. So it's unfortunate.
When I think about not only Jalen Jackson, but also Kevin Porter Jr., both of them in the pick and roll played really well. And it's going to go along with our conversation soon about Alperen Sengun, how well they allowed him to also facilitate. Just as a way to describe it, if you're thinking about the Rockets offense and you're visualizing kind of what it's looking like one game in, you think about Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green bringing the ball up the floor and getting into a quick pick and roll. Whether it's 21 series, which pretty much just involves Jalen and KPJ exchanging the basketball or kind of running a 1-2 action there, or whether it's just a simple dribble handoff with Sengun or a pick and roll, Jalen, KPJ, and Alperen Sengun are always involved at the start of the play. And when that play, the first initial transition hit or action does not work out, that's when we're seeing Alperen Sengun become an offensive hub. And I think that's what we're going to be talking about next, right, Jackson?
Absolutely. We're going to talk about that, dive deeply into that topic, and just kind of explore what the Rockets offense has looked like. We're going to get there in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for all of your football betting info and odds this season. Find the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every single game that you can get your hands on. And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every single sport out there. They'll have you covered for MLB postseason. NBA is starting up. It's right around the corner. And then they've also got you covered for UFC, MMA, boxing, all your fighting odds. BetOnline has you covered. Right now, you can head over to BetOnline to take a look at who the championship favorites are for this year in the NBA. Unfortunately, the Golden State Warriors leading the way at plus 575. You got the Boston Celtics right behind them at plus 625. Milwaukee Bucks bringing it up in third at plus 700. And then rounding out the top five, you got the Brooklyn Nets and the LA Clippers at plus 750 apiece. So for all of that and more odds, head over to betonline.net to learn more about the trends in action available to you. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, Alykhan, I'm really glad you brought up that point because you're going to be able to speak on it much more eloquently than I can. But that was something that I noticed, right, is with the Rockets in this game against the Spurs, it felt like their initial actions, right? Jalen and KPJ were often the primary, right? They had the ball in their hands. They would initiate the action. And it felt like a lot of possessions, right? And with Scoot especially, they would kind of, all right, first pick and roll. All right, maybe a second screen, right? And like a couple different, like trying to get something open, right? Trying to get Jalen or KPJ going downhill, trying to find a mismatch, trying to create that advantage offensively. And then if nothing was there, right, and getting into the action quickly, so early in the shot clock, getting into that quick pick and roll action with Alperen Sengun. And then if nothing was there, 10 to 12 seconds left on the shot clock, it's like, all right, we tried, couldn't create separation from the defender, couldn't get somebody going downhill, nothing's going to the bucket. Cool, Alpi, here's the ball, do your thing. And it felt like that was kind of the intention was, all right, option number one is we want to get Scoot and Jalen going. Obviously, we want to try to create some separation, get them, an advantageous matchup, whatever we can do here. If that doesn't work out, then our plan B in the offense is get Alpi the ball with enough time for him to make something happen, either for himself or draw a second defender and kick it out for an open shooter, or just create a foul and get to the free throw line, or just get an extra 14 seconds back on the shot clock. Oh, you are so muted, Alykhan. That was just production value in the tank. All right, he's back.
Yeah. When you think about the offense, right, and having the secondary ball or secondary kind of playmaker and Alp, it allows you to also do some interesting things off the ball. And I'm going to highlight the first play of the game for the Rockets. Okay, so if you're driving and you're listening to us on the podcast, don't close your eyes. But if you are able to close your eyes for me and help me, let's visualize this. Okay, you have Alperen Sengun at the top of the key. Okay, he has the ball in his hands. The initial action in transition doesn't work. So what happens? Kevin Porter Jr. and Jalen Green are on the right side of the court on the weak side. Jabari Smith and Eric Gordon are on the opposite side, the strong side, on the left. Both of them are getting into a sort of a split action, more of a pin down where one sets a pin down for the other. And in this case, Jabari's pretending to set a down screen for Eric to come off. But then after Jabari sets it, he slips real quickly and he's wide open for a dunk on the left side. Alpi is so surprised that, wait, he's open? He passes him the ball. He gets to score. That was the first play of the game that was drawn up. But the reason why I'm bringing it up, because even though it was drawn up, you have to understand where the Rockets are in this process, where they are currently. And by the way, if you are closing your eyes, you can open it back up. So where the Rockets are, they're establishing a foundation in training camp. When you're creating or kind of setting up your offense, you're doing very not vanilla, but you're setting up the actions. Okay, initially in transition, where are the 1 and the 2 supposed to be? Where's the 3, 4, and the 5? Jackson, you've tweeted this out. You've shared it on social media. The Rockets have these blue lines, these blue tapes on the court, in the practice court. They had it in also when they were in Lake Charles doing training camp. Why is that? That's getting the Rockets players in position to know, okay, in this moment, I know where I need to be. This is how I maintain proper spacing. So if they're in 4 out, 1 in, or 5 out, wherever they are in that moment, they have to make sure they are in those spots, because the optimal spacing is going to allow all these weak side movements to happen. Okay. Now, once you establish a basic foundation of what the set is, so 21 series or pistol, if you're listening and you don't know what that is, when I say that, it's essentially pick and roll or a dribble handoff or just a simple 1-2 action, one being Jalen Green, two being Kevin Porter Jr., where they're kind of initiating the offense on the right side of the court or just on one side of the court, and then the offense can then transition into a pick and roll with Sengun, or it can go into something else. So once you establish what the basic foundation of a play is, then you can add those variations. And we saw that play I referenced where I asked you to close your eyes, right, and think about it. That was a variation of a play. The Rockets usually like to run, but now because they have an idea of what the foundation is, expect that to happen over the course of the season. They're going to run more. They're going to run more of a layered offense. We're going to start seeing what Steven Silas wants to do in terms of being creative with Jalen Green, letting him go off the screens, putting him in situations where he can go right. If you go back and watch that play, that first play of the game where Jabari Smith scored, Jalen was on the right side of the court. That's by design. Steven Silas putting his players in position to be successful. He's adding some movement. You have Sengun giving him the basketball to be able to pass. I mean, it's all looking good right now offensively. But I think it's even better to know that if you're playing four out and one in, and you still start to play in transition, playing 5 out with Sengun as a trailer, you allow Sengun to do two things he's successful at. One, he can be in the post and score, or the other, he can be at the top of the key and help initiate the offense when the initial transition play is not working. So all in all, that's that one play, the first play of the game really helps me understand and get an idea of where the Rockets want to be this season. They want to be able to establish a foundation and then from there allow their young players to be successful.
And it's awesome because we heard Jalen, in fact, kind of talking about specifically, the idea of what Alp provides when he is on the floor. Because I asked Jalen what the distinction is between, when you have two bigs in Alperen Sengun and Bruno Fernando who kind of have different play styles and what each one kind of allows them to do. And Jalen, when he talked about Bruno, he's like, I think, Bruno's like a traditional big, right? Like he's rim runner, lets us, kind of gets inside, that kind of thing. Whereas with Alp, we kind of play off of him a little bit. He talked about the fact that, to play off of Alp, there's more cutting, there's more off-ball action, those kinds of things. And so it does feel like that's exactly what Steven Silas is kind of realizing and trying to unlock with using Alp as a bit of like an offensive hub situationally within the offense is he talked about this in Lake Charles at training camp, calling, Alp static, the way that he plays, right? Is unfortunately sometimes guys last season would just kind of stand around and I don't know, they were just waiting for Alp to do something, but it's understanding that there needs to be movement happening when Alp has the basketball to put him in the best position to then make those reads, make those passes, to get those easy opportunities. I love that was the play that you went back to highlight, because as you were like, we're going to talk about the first play of the game. I was like, yes, because the first play of the game was fantastic. Like Jabari went to go set a screen. He slipped. Like I remember breaking down that first play of the game in the initial recap pod, just because I thought it was so fantastic to see how wide open the floor was, how spaced out things were. If in that moment, Alp had decided to, he could have faced up and drove the ball in, and he would have had just a sea of space to operate with, and it would have been him against Jakob Poeltl one-on-one. And we saw Alp take it to Jakob Poeltl multiple times that game, one-on-one, and Poeltl really couldn't do anything to stop him. So that's kind of, I think, some of the optionality in the offense that Steven Silas is absolutely going for, where guys are still kind of reading and reacting, but maybe layering in some more concrete play designs to then, I guess, sprout those reactions off of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and one other point I want to bring up, Jackson, kind of highlighting what you talked about, is when you're playing as a run and gun team, that doesn't mean you just jack up a shot in 7 seconds. It's about getting set on the half court as soon as you possibly can, because then it allows you to create an advantage. It's not about jacking up a shot. It's just about you getting into a situation where you're forcing the defense to scramble. And I saw a lot of proof of that in the first half, especially, and the way that Jabari was running and the way Alp was trailing. That's just such a great thing for this team offensively, because then you allow your three really good shooters, those three perimeter players in Eric Gordon, Kevin Porter Jr., and Jalen Green to be able to get going because the defense is in scramble mode. So overall, that's just one point I want to make. And another thing is Alperen Sengun, man. He looks good. He looks really good, and I'm really excited to see how well he does, because in a 4-out 1-in offense, usually you have that one in the dunker spot. Well, Alp, he doesn't have to be in the dunker spot. He can facilitate from the post. He can facilitate from the high post. He can facilitate from the middle of the floor. It's great. And what's even better about the 4-out 1-in is that it doesn't have to always be Alp. If you go back and watch Kevin Porter Jr.'s highlights, there was one possession where there was a 1-4 flat. And for those of you who may not know what that is, 1-4 flat is basically where 4 shooters are on the corners and the wings, and you have one player in the free throw line basically running in isolation. Okay? And in this case, that's an example of a 4-out 1-in and technically in a possession. So there are different ways to do it. It doesn't just have to be Alp. It could be Jalen if he wants to clear out one side and go right. There's just different ways to go about doing it, but it's about putting yourself in a position to get the defense to have to honor all the shooters that are on the perimeter and get your offense going. So I think this is a good adjustment by Stephen Silas going into the season. And also, by the way, we didn't talk about it. You have a veteran, not a veteran, but you have a presence of a vertical threat now with Bruno Fernando. And I'm very excited to see how well he does in that type of role, because you saw Jakob Poeltl and other Spurs big struggle when KPJ was pretending to go up for a lob or for a shot. And then, oh, by the way, he just dished it to the side to a guy named Bruno Fernando for the dunk where he lobbed it up. So I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to see for the second unit. How much can they take advantage of Bruno Fernando's vertical spacing? Because that is something they sorely, sorely missed last season.
Yeah, having a trio of bigs in Alpi, Bruno, and Usman that can provide all, very different skill sets amongst the three of them is going to be really interesting. Kind of a triple, a three-headed dragon, if you will, at the 5 spot for the Rockets this season. And then maybe we'll call it a quadruple-headed dragon just because you got Boban waiting in the background just, to soak up some garbage time minutes and maybe throw in situationally here and there. But coming up, we're going to share some of our thoughts and expectations for the Rockets' second preseason game against the Toronto Raptors. We're going to get there in just one moment. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube. Just go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know in the YouTube comments what you are most excited to see or what you were hoping to see out of the Rockets-Raptors game Friday evening. It's going to be a fantastic game, the second of 4 preseason games. Now, Alykhan, first things first, going into this game, the Rockets are losing 2 starters because you're losing Jabari Smith due to the ankle sprain, and Eric Gordon is also going to be out due to rest because Eric Gordon is a grizzled veteran, and he is going to rack up a lot of DNPs this season due to rest. So from that perspective, John Lucas basically guaranteed that Jae'Sean Tate's going to start. So that's basically going to happen. He's like the antithesis of Stephen Silas. He was like, yeah, Tate will be out there, and Stephen refuses to ever give us any inkling as to who his starters are going to be. Even when everybody in the room knows who the starters are going to be, he will never confirm that to us. And you know what? At this point, I respect him for sticking to it. I don't know if it's just a running joke at this point, but I respect it. The question is, who's going to be that 5th starter, right? And to me, I think it makes sense. They could go either 2 ways. You're missing out on Eric Gordon. You're missing out on his shooting, his floor spacing. To me, it makes sense to potentially go Garrison Matthews to start in his place to kind of mirror that same skill set, the shooting, the spacing, all of that.
Twitter mad, man.
Hey, man.
Mad, to get Clutch fans mad, to get everybody mad right now. What's going on?
Look. I've got a silver lining here, but I think Garrison Matthews makes a lot of sense. And this is the other part, we saw KJ Martin being played exclusively at the 3 the other night in the opener.
Bing, bing,
he
bing.
could be the starter.
I said bing, bing. I meant ding, ding. But,
I mean, we can roll with bing, bing. That's fine. We can go back and clip that and make that a soundbite. Just anytime we bring something up, bing, bing.
Bing, bong. Okay, all right, just something.
Oh, Lord, no. Hey, you know what? We made it through, 2.1 segments, 2.2 segments without derailing the show. So I think that's maybe a new personal best for us. Who do you think makes more sense? Like, if you're gonna wager who starts, who do you think it's gonna be?
You need spacing to be able to kind of evaluate where you at offensively. And so I would go with Garrison Matthews with Jae'Sean Tate. Now, that being said, who do I want? I want KJ Martin start. I want to see him in a starting role. I want to see how he does at the 3, playing next to other guys. I also think this is a good way for us to be able to see how well Jae'Sean plays in that spacing role. Because if Jae'Sean is replacing Jabari Smith in the lineup, Jae'Sean's going to either be bringing the ball up the floor or he's going to be in the corners. Can he knock down 2 corner threes with that starting unit? Because the Raptors will gladly give him those 2 corner threes. And I think in the first 6 minutes of the first quarter against the Raptors, we'll have an idea of where Jae'Sean Tate is at in terms of his shooting, his stroke, and his confidence.
Now, the other side of this thing is the Raptors are a much different organization than the San Antonio Spurs currently. I mean, the Spurs might be the worst team in the NBA this year, and they might take that mantle from the Rockets.
Who has more chips, though, bro?
You know what?
I'm kidding.
That's fair. No, but with the Raptors, I mean, they've got a team that forces a lot of difficult contested shots. They've got a lot of length. They defend incredibly well. They've got a lot of switchability across their roster. This was already going to be a hard matchup for the Rockets if they were 100% healthy and if they still had Jabari and EG in the lineup. I don't necessarily like their chances without those two, and I'm worried it's going to look really bad, and we're going to go like just complete polar opposite here, where just on top of, on cloud 9 after game 1 against the Spurs, beat up on a, inferior opponent, all that, and then the Rockets may come out and get humbled a little bit by the Raptors here. Now, Maybe I'm off base here. Maybe they come out and the ball movement's still incredible. Again, they had 32 assists in the opener against the Spurs, and they were moving the ball really, really well, getting some really easy opportunities offensively. Maybe that's still there. Maybe they're able to still, tap into that a little bit, even without Jabari and EG out there. But I'm also just terrified of this Raptors team. I think they're really, really skilled, really good, and defensively, they're going to make the Rockets work for a lot.
And that's why I think this is a good test for the Rockets to be able to see kind of where they are offensively and defensively. For me, I have a few things I'm going to keep in mind. If you're listening, I hope you keep in mind to this stuff too. Number one, how well did the Rockets do against better ball pressure? Right? Alperen Sengun, he didn't have that much ball pressure on him whenever he had the ball at the top of the key. He's going to have ball pressure tomorrow. Cam Birch, different guys, will be up and in to Alperen Sengun. Can he show that he can, do the same things he did against that? How well do they move the basketball against a team has more speed, has more length? The Raptors are one of the longest teams and the biggest teams in the league. That's going to be really interesting for me to see lengthwise how well they do. Also, how do they do against a Raptors team that likes to isolate a lot? Last year they liked to isolate. This year the Raptors are probably changing their offense a little bit. But when you're a team that relies on mismatch hunting and isolation, how well does the Rockets defense hold up? They want to be able to play in drop coverage. They want to add some other things like blitzing and showing all different types of small coverage tweaks. How well do they do against a Raptors offense that's like that? That is what I'm paying attention to. That's going to give me an idea of where the Rockets are currently in terms of the implementation of their coverages defensively, their schemes offensively, and how well their young players are doing against a team that just has just better veterans and just better defenders overall.
So do you think that means that they're going to come out of the gate and start hunting? I'm assuming hunting Alperen Sengun on switches just to start the game.
I mean, I definitely would. I think it's a smart idea, and I think that's what you want as a Rockets fan. You want to be able to see how Alp does in those situations. He's added on strength. He's added on weight. He's clearly 2 inches taller according to the chart. Let's see how he does. And that's going to be a very, very big thing for me against the Raptors. Another thing I want to pay attention to, Kevin Porter Jr. had a good playmaking day. We talked about it. How well does he do against the Raptors team that is a much better pick-and-roll defensive team, right? How well does Jalen do off the ball? How well do they do playing together? You want to see this continuity. You want to see them build off of their first game. But it's a Raptors team. It's a much better team. It's going to be really interesting to see how they can kind of mesh those two different things together.
And what was interesting in that first game, too, is it felt like, over the course of the game, right, they realized, okay, like Jabari's cooking, right? Like Jabari's got it tonight. The ball movement was good, but it did feel like they were kind of prioritizing, okay, like, Jabari's open, get him the ball, right? Get him and let him just pull up and keep hitting his shots. I want to see, right? I'd like to see one of Kevin Porter Jr. or Jalen Green like have a successful offensive night, and not just from a playmaking standpoint. Like that was great to see, but they're going to need the offensive output from probably both of those guys if they want to have a chance to actually win the game, because now you're down 2 starters. You're out EG, you're out Jabari Smith. Those guys, EG had, I think, 13 the other night, 13 or 15. So, I mean, those guys combined for somewhere in the realm of 35 or so points in the preseason opener. So you're going to need to make up those points somewhere. And we know that Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. can absolutely be like an offensive flamethrower, tornado, what have you, But can they tap into that, and can they get it going? Because it felt like maybe the other night, right, if they didn't have Jabari, if he didn't, get hot from three, if they didn't have other guys hitting shots, then I feel like we maybe would have seen a little bit more of like a KPJ or Jalen Green kind of takeover, like more forcing the issue offensively, whereas those guys realized, oh, everybody's hitting shots tonight? Great. We don't have to try and take the game over, so to speak. I think we're going to see a different mentality and a different version of those two guys because they're going to have to put their stamp on this game by putting the ball in the bucket for the Rockets to have a chance to make it competitive.
Lastly, what I'm looking forward to most, Jackson, besides the game, is the fact that we'll have, next time we do our Locked On episodes together, we're going to have 2 games worth of film to be able to break down and talk about. And I'm really excited for that because it's going to give us a better idea of where this team is. It'll allow us to kind of talk about some plays that they're implementing that we can discuss and hopefully inform you, the listeners, more about what's going on with your favorite team.
Absolutely. It's going to be a ton of fun. We will have you covered for that next week. Now, it's worth noting, if you made it to this point in the episode, then clearly you are either just a demented Rockets fan and you have an unhealthy, obsession with this team, or you really like, me and Alykhan. Either way, we commend you for your dedication. But Alykhan does have a dedicated day that he's supposed to show up on this show. However, he is very slippery, and sometimes he'll show up on a different day. So if you were expecting your weekly Alykhan episode on Wednesday last week, we had to shuffle some things around due to our respective schedules. I'm putting all the blame on Alykhan. It was actually kind of it was both of us were at fault. But if you don't get Alykhan on Wednesday, you will get Alykhan on Friday. So that is how our weekly schedule works. We also have, unveiling starting next week, we'll have another new weekly co-host for the show, which, I won't unveil right now. You'll have to wait until next week. But we will have a new weekly co-host in addition to Alykhan. So a couple of different regular guest voices on the program. But Alykhan, always a pleasure to have you on the show. You know the drill. You got to let everybody know where to track you down at.
Follow me on Twitter, Rockets_insider. Make sure you're following us at Locked On Rockets. You need to make sure you're following us so you stay up to date. So much great content coming. Cannot wait for some film studies soon.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing, or if you listen to your podcast, that's Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all podcast platforms. We're also on YouTube, so go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening, and we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.